May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Please be seated. Names matter. In Exodus, Moses asked God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. We cannot know a person if we don't know their name. Our names make us us, instead of just that woman over there or the tall guy. God wanted to make God's self known to Moses. God wanted Moses and the Israelites to know the God of their ancestors lived amongst them and cared about their struggles and knew how they were oppressed. God and Moses were literally on first-name basis. This is indeed a holy encounter. This suggests a level of intimacy that's never found before this moment in the Bible. In Genesis, God is referred to as God. There's lots of gods there. But this was a personal God that knew them and that they knew. We don't actually know what God's name is to this day because people thought it was too holy, and still do today, to say God's name. In the Hebrew scriptures, God's name is abbreviated YHWH. We Christians pronounce that as Yahweh, but we're not sure that's right. And we don't really know what the translation was because Hebrew has no vowels in biblical times. So the translation of God's name might actually be, I am who I will be, or even, I caused to be what I caused to be. I think that's fitting because we worship a God who was and is and will be forever. When God gave Moses his name, God stopped being deity and became friend, confident, beloved teacher, holy God. Not having a name puts God in the category of me being called woman or mother or nurse. But once we sit down and talk, and you know my name, I'm no longer mother, deacon, nurse. I become Deacon Gerry, who wants to find a way for youth and young adults to know God and to follow God and live in community. I become Nurse Gerry, who finds a way to empower women to care for themselves and their families. And you know what? This morning, I was in the store and somebody said to me, don't I know you? Do you work at the hospital? And I said, yeah, I'm Gerry. And she's like, I thought so. I remember you when you took care of me when I was pregnant. They know my name. I'm no longer a stranger. I'm a real person. We made a connection. And in some ways, we're both changed by that encounter. That's why Moses knowing God's name was so important. Did you notice the setting of the Old Testament reading today? We were at Mount Horeb, and we were with Moses as he left the wilderness, and we were standing at the mountain of God, God's mountain. The creator of the universe called to Moses right there in the wilderness. And wilderness in the Bible is not just going for a walk in the woods. It's a time and a place separate from everyday life. Even today, many see the wilderness as a thin place, a holy place, a place where heaven and earth get close to each other. And a lot of people meet God in the wilderness. So I want to hit the rewind, what happens before today's reading. You remember Moses, he was that dude that got saved and pulled out of the water, gets raised by Pharaoh's daughter, grows up as the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. Well, a little bit before this, he's gotten in trouble because he was taking care of one of God's chosen people, an Israelite that was being mistreated, and he accidentally killed somebody. And so Moses had to escape, and Moses was scared, and Moses was alone, and he thought God had forgotten him. But right there in the middle of that trouble, God showed up, and Moses wasn't alone anymore. God hadn't forgotten him. The all-knowing God saw the way that the Israelites, and Moses in particular, were being treated. And God had a plan to save the Israelites from the Egyptian abuse. The God who knew Moses called Moses to be his agent right there on earth and to lead the Israelites to salvation, to the promised land, the land of milk and honey. And God didn't call a powerful guy. God called Moses. Moses, who was slow of speech and felt really unworthy to be called God. But God called him anyway. God knew Moses' potential. This God, the God of Moses, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, and Abraham, and Sarah, he's our God too. Do you think that was the first time that Moses and the sheep were in that wilderness? Was that the first time that he was feeding his sheep there? Do you think that was the first time that God called him? Or was it that he wasn't paying attention? Had God been there all along and Moses just missed it? And what does God say to him? You are standing on. Somebody say it, come on. Thank you. That pasture where he'd always fed his sheep, it wasn't just a pasture. It was. Do you know why? It was because God was there. Think about that. Right here, right now, you're standing on holy ground. Why are you standing on holy ground? Because God is here. Everywhere you stand is holy because God is here. I encourage you this Lent to look for wilderness. Make time and space to meet God. Because you know what? He's already there. He's already here, and he's over there. Have you ever had a one-on-one conversation with God? You know, hey, Gerry, come here. I want to talk to you. You have? I want to hear about that later at coffee hour. Have you ever seen a burning bush? No, not me either. Not like Moses. God wanted Moses to know what he had planned for him. And he wants us to know too. I was listening to a podcast from the Episcopal Church, and it really sparked something in me. Okay, pause for groans. Yes, pardon the pun, sparked something in me. The preacher said, there are little fires all around us. Think about that. Maybe you've seen a burning bush, but you missed it. You probably didn't really see a burning bush, something on fire but not consumed. But I bet you've seen glimpses of the holy. We see glimpses of the holy God every day. We're being called. We just need to get quiet and let God get a word in edgewise. I'm often too busy with my agenda to see and hear what God's up to in my life. I've had holy moments, and I bet if I was quieter, I'd have more of them. I bet I've missed a few burning bushes. Maybe God is calling us to something different, to something more. And like Moses, we're afraid. It's too big. I'm not worthy. Biblical people are afraid too. They don't feel worthy. But you know what? God wants you, ready or not, worthy or not. God has a plan. God will equip the called. And like Moses, we're called by God, and he knows our names. Names are really important. They connect us to our family, shape our futures. My whole name is Geraldine Teresa. I'm named after my grandmother and my great-grandmother. My daughter's name is Hope because we had some trouble having a baby, and we hoped in the Lord, and God sent a baby. But you know what my favorite name is? Child of God. I was adopted into the family of God at my baptism. My parents brought me to church, sent me to religious education classes, and I'm still unworthy, but I'm still called. And I pray, and pray with me, that we can discern God's will in our lives. The gospel today scared me a little when I was reading it and preparing. So I'm like, I'm not preaching on that. But there's a call there too. It's more subtle. Not exactly a burning bush, more like a spark. The gardener, who if you're dim like me, you don't realize that's Jesus. The gardener saw the potential of the fig tree. The gardener knew it needed a little more time to bear fruit. But don't miss the last part. The gardener tended the tree. The gardener added the fertilizer and dug around the roots. The tree didn't just bear fruit by itself. And how do we get to the part about naming, prayer, and action? We can find figurative fig trees in our lives that need our attention to bear fruit. I wonder here, have some ministries grown old? Do they need to be pruned and cultivated? Or maybe they've reached the end of their lives and need to be dug up so that we can start something new. St. Francis is known by God's name too. And I wonder what God is calling us to do. I encourage you to pray and discern what we are being called to. There's a local church here in the diocese that had a vision 2 years ago. They wanted to start a Hispanic ministry. That was a little tricky. Their priest didn't speak Spanish. The vestry was like, we don't want to do that. That's a lot of work. But you know what happened? Little by little, God's vision began to grow. This summer, they started meeting weekly for worship. And recently, a priest who had been Roman Catholic came and was accepted into the Episcopal Church, and he is leading Mass every week. And this afternoon, he's going to teach the dedicated volunteers how to lovingly care for their altar. And probably more stuff. They have an unused rectory there that's going to be converted into somewhere for him to stay, and there's going to be mission So my question to you is, what is God calling us to do? I encourage you to pray and share the little fires you see burning around you. Step out in boldness. Step out in trust. There's a lot of potential here, but we have to look for the sparks. We have to see what's up. We have to figure out what we're being called to do. Amen.